We're here celebrating the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the Azalea Park Neighborhood. We're talking to Dr. Rick Simmons, who grew up in the neighborhood, I understand. Is that correct?
Yes, I was born here in 1955. My parents bought the house here on Willow Drive in 1954, and they had come in from Winter Park. They'd originally moved in from Birmingham, Alabama, and had moved into Winter Park, had been there for about a year. My brother was born, and then they had purchased this house here on Willow Drive. So I was actually the first one in my family that was born on Willow Drive. Not the first one born on Willow Drive, because that would have been Jay Blish, who was next door at 1 Willow Drive.
Well, that's good memory. All right. So where did you go to school?
I first started at Christ the King. They had a kindergarten, and we would go. I was in the first part of the shift. It went from, I guess, 9 to noon. The teacher's name, I believe, was Miss Perry. Yeah, it was Miss Perry. And quite a few of the people I know, for instance, Cheryl Hansen, the doctor's daughter, she was in my class there at Christ the King. Did that for the first year. That would have been 1961. And 1962 started at Azalea Park Elementary School. My first grade teacher was, I know her last name was Fugate. I forget what her last name is. I remember Fugate, Reed, Granger. I remember 6th grade I had Sharon Seifert. 5th grade I had Mrs. Mays. 4th grade I can't remember who that would be right off. Then at that point we moved over to, they call it a middle school now, it was a junior high school, but it was Stonewall Jackson Junior High School. Was there from 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and then on to Colonial High School for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. So I graduated from Colonial in 1974.
When did Colonial open? Before you arrived?
Yeah, Colonial had been around for a long time. I believe it opened like in the late 50s. Yeah, because there were actually some people. I believe Jay Blish's oldest brother Nelson had first started at the Orlando High School, and then I believe he finished when Colonial High School opened. But a lot of that I don't remember because I didn't go to that school. Okay. I just always remember Colonial High School being there. The interesting thing that I heard this as a rumor about Colonial High School. I've never had it substantiated, but this area is kind of swampy. And they said when the schools were initially built, the school and the football field were both on the same level. And over time, because of the swampiness, the football field became lower. And you'd actually notice the sidewalk, because the sidewalk just started crumbling as it would travel from the school down to the football field. So it created a lower elevation. Of course, the school I went to at Colonial High School doesn't exist anymore. They've essentially torn all that down and put in a whole new campus. I think they did that maybe 10 years ago.
Prior to their 50-year anniversary. So you're a doctor? I'm
a podiatrist, yes. I started my practice in Winter Park in 1983, and I did a kind of an office-based practice for about 12 years, and now I do house calls only. I live in Rockledge, and I essentially travel almost anywhere, within a reasonable range of about maybe 50, 60 miles. But I mostly take care of what we call shut-in patients, the elderly who can no longer leave their home. It's not a convenience type factor. In other words, just because somebody wants me to be there, it's because it's a necessity that they need to be seen in the home.
Good. So tell me about your folks. You said they moved here from...
Yeah, my mother and father met in Birmingham, Alabama. My mother was actually born in Birmingham. And my father went to Birmingham after World War II, and as part of the GI Bill, he studied watchmaking. And he finished his watchmaking and went to work for a company called Simmons Jewelers. And Simmons at the time was, they sold a lot of watches. Everybody used to do things on credit on time, and they would sell it to the miners because they used to have a big steel mill right there in Birmingham. And so I remember my father told me the story that, on Fridays he'd have to go down to the where they'd pay the miners, and they'd have to collect their 10 or 15 cent payment on their watch to make sure they got that. Well, Surtees then moved, not all of them, but they moved and opened up a store in the Winter Park area. I think they actually bought an existing business, and my father was just asked to come down. He came down in the summer of '53, and decided to stay here, and so he did. So my father's actually been on Park Avenue in Winter Park since 1953. He's been a longtime resident of Winter Park also. He is a merchant. I mean, my father opened up a business called Simmons Jewelers, which is still open today.
Your father is a regular sight around the neighborhood. He has some interesting antiques.
He has quite a collection of things. You know, I think probably the most interesting thing about him is he's 88 and he still walks around, drives his own car, goes to work, and still fixes watches. As far as antiques are concerned, including a lot of clocks that he has that he has now taken all the bells out of because he doesn't want to hear them ring on every hour. But he has I think he has a Model A. He has a Model A, a Model T Ford. And you'll see him a lot of times in some of the festivities, like a Christmas parade. I know he was in the St. Patrick's Day parade over in Winter Park. But he's an avid collector, that's correct.
And still working at the age of 80?
He's 88. He'll be 88 this coming July.
Great.
Yes, exactly.
So tell me about your siblings.
Well, I have an older sister, that would be Anne, and Anne was born in Birmingham, and she came down with the family when they moved first into Winter Park. Then there'd be my brother Bobby, and then myself. The interesting thing about the first three of us is that we're, from my older sister to me, there's 3 years between us, so it's like boom, 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 right there in a row. My youngest sister, Margie, was born in 1963. She was 8 years after me. I was born in 55.
So, you've seen a lot of change take place over the years in this area.
Well, this area's changed dramatically. You know, as kids, we used to play, there was an area behind these churches here. We used to call them the hills, and the reason we call them the hills is as little kids, where they had dug the ditch, they threw the dirt up onto the side of, and so to us, those were the little hills. And so that used to be our little play area. We'd ride along the dirt mounds, and the water naturally would be down in the ditch area. Now today, they've closed all that in. There's drainage culverts that do that. Back then, it was just a big wide open ditch. And there was a big, huge field that existed, again, behind the churches. And it used to be kind of a fun place, you know, just kind of hang out, you know, build your forts and whatnot. I think still at the north end of Willow Drive, just on the backside of Dahlia, I think it's, I don't think they've developed all of that yet. Yeah, okay, so it's still, because I think that's behind, actually probably behind your house, I think is still not developed. But we had an interesting group because we had, you know, the Orange County Medical Examiner, who wasn't that person at the time, but Thomas Heggert was there on Dahlia Drive, and we had the Dawkins, the Summers house, and we had our house, which was, we were the second house in. There was the Blishes, which was 1 Willow, we were at 9, the Seggs, the Crooms, the Roberts. The next house was kind of, it transitioned a few times. I remember the Sands primarily, then the Cantrells, and you know, then you get to the other end of the block. We didn't pay much attention to, you know, once you got past the Mimosa section.
Sure. Okay. Well, anything significant, momentous that comes to mind that you'd really like to get?
Probably, you know, the interesting thing to me is I'd run across, you know, my mother died in 2002 of a brain aneurysm, and being the historian type person that I am, I'd gone through a lot of her writings, and I ran across this postcard that she'd sent to her mother, and I think it was 1959, which would have made me 3 going on 4, could have been a little bit later, but my mother sent this postcard to her mother, and she was writing about how she was greeted at the door with a police officer returning me because I had walked up from my parents' home up to Azalea Park Elementary School, which I'm going to guess is probably about half a mile, and it just meandered up there, which was back in the day when kids just kind of meandered around and did stuff. And she was kind of laughing about it because she didn't even miss me, didn't even know that I was gone. And I kind of look at something like that because in today's day and age it would have just been, you know, almost a capital offense. But I mean, back then it was just you know, the police officer picks your kids up and brings them home and knocks on your door and says, here's your kid, you know, make sure you take care of them. But way back when, we had Lake Barton Road. It was a 2-lane road. It was still kind of busy, but it wasn't anything like, you know, the 436 Cimarron Boulevard that we have here today. So when people are looking at it and thinking of this little kid walking up there, it wasn't like we had all this heavy traffic. In fact, most families had one car, and the father took the car. So most of the time during the middle of the day, there weren't a lot of cars driving around because that car was gone, you know, to work with the father of the family.
So it was relatively safe.
I'm still here.
You are.
Yes.
And
so
we're glad you are.
thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us today, Dr. Simmons.
Thank you, Warren. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it.